The attention has been on Huawei for many months now out of the US, and to some success. We had the UK, of course, deciding not to put in place or banning Huawei last week. Now it seems the attention is on TikTok, part of the ByteDance company that's based here in Beijing. What are the concerns in Washington? And in your experience, are they legitimate?
Well, thanks so much, Tom and David. It's great to be with you. There are three issues with TikTok. And certainly when you look at Huawei and TikTok, there is a common thread, which is that they are both Chinese companies. The concern with TikTok, the first is that as a company, it's collecting personal data of all of its users. And as we all know, they are saturating the market, not just of teenagers, but of adults around the world. The second issue is because it's a Chinese company, that means that at any point in time, the Chinese government could turn to TikTok and ask for all of that data, ask for all of the data that it's collected, passwords, bank information, location, and internet addresses. And the reason why that's important, the third reason, is because we can only speculate what China is looking to do with that information, but certainly in the United States, there are national security concerns about China's interest in espionage. And when you look at all of the data that's being collected, there are also concerns about China's artificial intelligence and what they're developing when it comes to AI. AI is only as good as the data that goes into it. And China certainly is accumulating a lot of data, more so than any other country. And when you look across its access through its companies, as well as the theft of data that's been documented, it's very concerning.
Kirsten, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, says they don't store any US data in China. They store it in Singapore and other jurisdictions, but not in China. And they've said that they wouldn't hand that data over to Beijing if that was requested. Why doesn't that assuage the concerns? And is an outright ban, do you think, now inevitable? And would that be appropriate?
So as far as why that doesn't assuage concerns is because we all know the Chinese government. And while it doesn't matter where the data is stored, again, at any point, China could turn to that company and say, we need the data. And the company will have to turn it over. As far as an outright ban, what we're seeing in the United States, a week ago Friday, we saw a false alarm on the part of Amazon. It took them 5 hours to retract a memo that said that they had banned the use of the app by all of its employees. But on Monday, a week ago Monday, we saw Wells Fargo ban the app. It's a risk management decision for each of the companies as well as for governments as far as what we're willing to accept as the risk and the security risk and what we're not willing to accept. What we have to recognize is that Chinese companies enter the US market with a presumption of guilt. And that's based on years of China stealing intellectual property, data theft, and otherwise. So we certainly have a history here to make smart decisions about how we're willing to manage our risk.
So, Kirsten, is it simply a matter of time before we start discussing, we went from Huawei, we went to TikTok, is it a matter of time before we start discussing the Alibabas of the world, the Tencents of the world? At what point do you think this then encompasses basically all Chinese tech companies?
Well, it's a great question because I think as we sequence and we continue to have concerns about what China's doing with the data that it's collecting, we will not know what's going to happen. But I think right now what you're seeing is a very measured and deliberate company by company effort. What's interesting about the UK decision is in February, the UK had made the decision to accept Huawei's technology into their 5G infrastructure. And now, as we've seen this month, they've decided not to. So what you're starting to see with countries is, again, this risk management analysis, is it worth it to run that risk? Certainly not all Chinese companies, I don't think we can assume that, may be in this space and in the interest of collecting data that will get turned over to the government, but we can't be sure of that. And so again, everybody, every country and every industry, every company needs to make very smart decisions about what they're willing to make vulnerable to a Chinese government.
The broader conversation on security breaches, risk reward, network security, I would imagine now, and I think the Hong Kong government, for example, yesterday ordered government staff to work from home. I'm going to bring the virus story up here. I can imagine that's an absolute nightmare, in terms of protecting your network if people are working from the office, you have people working from home. Do you think there's an appreciation right now of how much it's really going to cost a lot of companies to keep everything safe moving into next year?
I think it's a huge concern, and I'm not sure. It's not that there may not be an appreciation. I just don't think we can anticipate what that cost is going to be. So when we saw the pandemic break out and we saw companies move very quickly to remote working, we saw a lot of makeshift policies in place to get us through that crisis. The US government relaxed privacy requirements for telemedicine that I thought were quite frankly shocking, but it was an example of what needed to be done in order to survive the moment. But the moment's going to be a lot longer than 3 or 4 months. And when we talk to large companies, when I talk to leaders of large companies in industry, what we're hearing is that a lot of them are going to bring back about 20% of their workforce into the office, which means that 80% are going to be working from home. The ability to create security policies that are consistent across a remote workspace and a physical in-office workspace, I think are going to be extremely challenging, particularly given the obstacles that we saw in these 3 months. So it will require investment, it will require resources, and a rethinking of a lot of the policies that are meant to keep networks and companies secure.
Kirsten, I want to get your views on the Twitter hack. Twitter, as a company, surely is aware that it's a prime target for hacking attempts. How did they fail? How did they fall down on this? Is it a lack of resources? Is it a lack of talent? What's going on behind the scenes? And do we have any more clarity on who was behind the hack?
Well, they fell down hard. To answer your question, it is unacceptable for a company like Twitter that has access to those types of users, high visible leaders of countries, and not only the access to the users, but access to their voices. It's unacceptable for them to not have the proper privacy and security procedures in place. And what we're learning is that it was social engineering, so it's human behavior, and that multiple people at Twitter had access to these accounts, which just from an access management perspective shouldn't be happening. That should be certainly reserved to a small number of people. What this hack shows, among other things, is this recognition of the power of this platform. And by that, I mean Twitter is critical infrastructure. When we look at the power of Twitter, we saw in 140 characters or less an SEC investigation happen after Elon Musk, whether he was serious or not, talked about illegally buying back shares. We've seen President Trump in one tweet talk about policy, fire senior leaders within his administration. This company has enormous impact and influence and is a vehicle both for politics and economics. And the US government needs to be talking to Twitter as a critical infrastructure company and looking at its security and its privacy guidelines just as a first step.